Awesome. Karen from Illinois, Chet from Sacramento. Amazing. Thank you for joining. Paul from New Jersey, Linda from Portland. Awesome. We've still got people trickling in, um, but it is 2 minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Thomas. I'm an organizer with Food and Water Watch. I am based in Seattle, Washington, and I am really glad that you all are here with us today. We have got some awesome experts and colleagues from Popular Democracy, from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and my colleagues at Food and Water Watch. And we are here to talk about what's at stake in this congressional funding fight. Seems like we've gone through this a handful of times so far just in 2025. But obviously, the stakes are really high. So we're going to talk about that and then how working together we can take on these tough challenges and protect the resources and the communities that are most important to us. A couple quick housekeeping things here on Zoom. Um, Feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat. It's great to see where everyone is coming from. If you have a specific question, we want to be able to keep track of those. So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, kind of right in the middle. So please use that. I have a couple colleagues who can help answer some questions live, and then we'll have some time for that towards the end of the call as well. So if you have a specific question for me or one of the other panelists, use the Q&A button. And right next to that, there is a show captions button. So if you want to turn on live captioning, you can do that there. Again, that's the Q&A button and the show captions. Those are right at the bottom of your screen. And we are going to record this. We've already started recording. So we'll send this around to everyone who signed up for the webinar. So you can share that with friends or neighbors along with the resources that we mention on the call. And one quick action before we start. Some of you might have heard about this from our weekly resistance reminders text messages. We sent an invitation out yesterday, I believe. So if you want to get one text a week from Food and Water Watch with a couple simple actions you can take to fight back against the Trump administration and the threats in Congress, just open up your text message app. Send a message to the number 23321 with the word resist. So again, the number is 23321, and then the message is resist, hit send. We send a message once a week, usually on Mondays, with just one or two things you can do. So this week it was joining this webinar. Sometimes it's calling your member of Congress. Sometimes it's attending another event. So we try to make that easy for people. And again, some of you might have heard about this webinar from that yesterday. Okay, so here's why we're here tonight. We are here together tonight at a really, really critical time. As Trump has deployed the military in our nation's capital, and after the passage of what we're calling the Big Ugly Bill, which was the largest transfer of wealth from working people up to billionaires at the top, the administration continues to abuse their power and gut key protections for clean water and safe food, for healthcare, for education, for housing. And Republicans have control of all three branches of government. And so there are not a lot of opportunities for Democratic members of Congress to use their power to block this dangerous agenda. But the current debate around the spending bill is one of those opportunities where Democratic members have an opportunity. And that's why we're here today. We want to push the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, in the Senate and the other Democratic members of Congress to really stand strong and really kind of put their money where their mouth is, use their power to block the devastating cuts to key programs that benefit working people, our safe food and clean water and the environment. So Congress is currently debating an appropriations bill that is needed to fund the government. If they do not pass those bills, parts of the government shuts down on October 1st. So unlike the big ugly bill, the reconciliation bill, hopefully you've heard of, that only required 50 votes to pass the Senate. An appropriations bill that is needed to avoid a government shutdown requires 60 votes to pass in the Senate. So that means that Democratic votes are required and Democratic senators have leverage over the process. This is a little bit complicated. We'll explain it more later. But the last time we faced this situation, it was earlier this year, And most Senate Democrats opposed these funding bills without protections against further abuses by the Trump administration. But Minority Leader Schumer and a handful of other Senate Democrats went along with Republicans to avoid a government shutdown, but they got nothing in return. They did not really bargain. They got zero concessions or protections in exchange. And so this is the thing that we're trying to avoid. We cannot allow Democrats to just hand over the keys again. And there's signs that there's more Democrats, some of those folks who did the wrong thing earlier this year have changed their tune this time. So that's what we're going to talk about. Democratic senators must not vote for any funding bills that have devastating impacts on essential services, on our communities, and on the environment. And so, as a broader progressive movement, it's really important that we come together and show these leaders that their constituents are demanding real action, not just words, but real action to back up their progressive vision and real bold opposition to Trump's agenda. But of course, we know that takes all of you, that takes us, people in our larger networks, to engage directly and together with how we win this fight. So that was just a quick summary. You're going to hear from a few folks who are a lot smarter than me about how we win this and what the impacts of this fight are all about. So I'm going to start with our first speaker, Isaias Guerrero. Isaias is a director of Fight Back for Popular Democracy. Popular Democracy is a network of 50 grassroots organizations across 34 states and the District of Columbia. They unapologetically demand transformational change for Black, Brown, and low-income communities. Isaias comes from the immigrants' rights movement, starting back in 2007, found his passion there for building power for liberation. Isaias, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and the whole team of the Food and Water Watch. Yeah, I'm very glad to be here with you all, and thank you all also for being here, for taking democracy serious and the attacks to our democratic system, which is basically eroding every day as we go by. But we have been here before, our ancestors have been here before, and it is our responsibility to tap into that wisdom, into that power, and continue including people into this movement so that democracy is not taken away. So, as Thomas said, my name is Isaias Guerrero. I'm originally from Colombia. I'm an immigrant who basically now calls Indiana home and now Washington, D.C. home. And I have the privilege of working alongside 50 of the most badass community-based organizations across 32 states that are every day fighting for Black and Brown communities. And so we are very concerned about not only the attacks on democracy, but also how Republicans are using the appropriations process, basically the funding process, to take away some of the most precious and most hard-fought programs like it is Medicaid, like public housing, public education, which I know some of my esteemed colleagues are going to be talking about today. So I want to just talk about a little bit broad what is at stake in terms of the appropriations process so that we get a sense. And then I would love to share a little bit of how we as Popular Democracy are fighting to invite you all to join us, to join our organizations who are, again, in the ground, just fighting every day against these attacks. So um, right now, September is critical. As you all know, the appropriations process, we have until September 30th to make sure that whatever proposal Congress passes does not attack our communities. And so September 30th is the deadline that Congress has to pass some sort of budget proposal. And so what we're seeing right now is the Democrats and Republicans basically trying to include in the budget process either cuts to programs that Republicans have proposed, or some Democrats, most of them, trying to fight for these programs. But it is really up to us to ensure that Democrats really like grow a spine and defend our communities and push Republicans so that they do not continue messing with us. So apart from these cuts that were passed in the reconciliation bill, that basically um, there's an estimated that 17 million people would become uninsured. There's more cuts. So what we're seeing is proposed health and human services budget would be slashed by 25%. The National Institute of Health funding by 18 billion, Center for Disease Control and Prevention by 4 billion, if RK doesn't just like decimate it, 500 million from the Food and Drug Administration, and thousands of full-time workers in drastic restructure. So we're seeing that there will be 116 billion that are proposed in the appropriations bill right now being taken away from the Department of Health and Human Services, which basically would not take away a lot of the basic access to um, vaccines, to like public health education, the public health promoters that are every day educating our community and connected them with basic services. Harming our public schools. So there's 12 billion proposed in cuts. So that's a 15% cut. We're talking all about from after school programs, community schools, teacher trainings and adult literacy, English as a second language and migrant education, and basically would cut nearly half of its staff of the Department of Health. This is like 79 billion proposed in funding from the Department of Ed in the appropriations. Threatening to housing programs. So our base is very concerned about public housing and advocates for public housing. And there's basically 33.6 billion. That's 44% of the Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget that is being proposed to be cut. Um, Let me see what else. I'm full of like a list of bad news. FY 26 House Appropriations Bill also in a way it rejects most of Trump's deep cuts. So in a way we're seeing that there's like some resistance there. But we do have to keep an eye because not only HUD is at stake, but also just like very important voucher programs that could kick off almost 400,000 people of these important vouchers that are basically putting a roof over people's heads. And then, as you all know, this massive immigration enforcement machine has gotten almost 12 times its funding from the reconciliation bill. And so we have to continue fighting for our immigrant sisters and family, in my case, so that our loved ones are not being kidnapped away. So we, as Popular Democracy, are bringing people into DC all last week, this week, and the following week. Last week, we were advocating on healthcare. This week, we'll be advocating on public housing, and next week, we'll be advocating for public education. And so I will put my email in the chat because we want you to connect with the organizations who we work with so that you can join them whenever they have in-district actions. After September, we're going to be focusing very strongly on in-district actions to continue pushing around accountability, one for reconciliation bill, and then two, to ensure that before the appropriations process is passed, we can, one, make sure that these cuts aren't included, but two, most importantly, is so that whether it is a long-term or a short-term continuing resolution that is passed. Basically, what that means is whatever proposal Congress passes around the budget, we include the most important pieces that are being taken away from the reconciliation bill in back in this proposal. So basically that Medicaid isn't cut for the 14 million, that the extensions aren't taken away, and that basically we continue fighting for the right for people to have a system of healthcare with dignity. So I will put my email in the chat. I'll be happy to also be responding to questions. And yeah, please reach out. I would love to connect with you so that you can join us in the actions in DC and in district. And I'll pass it back to you, Thomas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isaias. And yeah, like I said, we'll share contact info and resources that are mentioned here. And if folks have questions, again, use the Q&A box, and we'll get to some of those either live or at the end of the call. Okay, Michelle, if you want to pull up the first poll, have a little interactive uh, activity for everyone. So people should just see a pop-up that just comes up. So quick, real basic question for you. Do you think that Minority Leader Schumer and Senate Democrats are fighting Trump's agenda, fill in the blank, not enough, the right amount, or they're actually fighting too much? What do you think? Are the Democrats in the Senate fighting Trump's agenda, not enough, the right amount, or they're fighting too much? Okay, Michelle. In another 30 seconds, maybe close it out. We'll see what people say.
All right, I'm going to close the poll. Got 79% of people participating. Are you seeing the results?
I'm not seeing the results, but you can read it to us. Oh, there it is. Oh, it was there for just a second. There we go. Basically, everybody said not enough. One person said the right amount. But yes, I personally think it's not enough. This is what we're here to change. We know that politicians from both parties need to be pushed by their constituents, need to be pushed by our progressive movement. And that sometimes when we push, that really works, and they end up fighting more alongside us. So that's why we're here today. Glad to see that most folks are in agreement, and we're going to talk about ways to do that shortly. All right, thanks. We're gonna have one more poll. This may be a little less of an obvious answer in a few minutes, but first, I want to introduce David. David Wheaton is an attorney and policy counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, also known as LDF. LDF was founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall. Maybe you heard of him. It's the nation's oldest civil rights law organization, and David's going to speak about the threats to education and housing. So, David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas, and thanks so much for Food and Water Watch for organizing this. And so, as we know, the Trump administration is making, cuts to a wide variety of programs and a wide variety of critical resources, especially for low income and for Black folks around the country. And so I want to focus on two primary areas, and that's education and housing, where we've seen a lot of cuts. But we've also seen cuts to funds that Congress has already appropriated. And so that's really was really frustrating about the Trump administration is they've been making these rescission cuts, and they've also just been withholding funding that Congress has already appropriated. And so the last speaker spoke about the appropriations process and everything that Congress goes through to get funds to different agencies. But what the Trump administration has done is they have sometimes just frozen that funding or not spent that funding for whatever reason. It started with Elon Musk and the Doge program of cutting programs and funding that Congress had already appropriated to now with the Trump administration solidifying that effort with rescission packages. And so one of the really frustrating things I want to highlight on the education front is also the withholding of funds. And so we do know from reports that the next rescission package that the Trump administration may send to Congress will have to do with education cuts. And so we already know earlier this year that the Trump administration withheld about $5.6 billion in education funding that was, again, already approved by Congress and slated to go out in July 1. Has only offered to release another 1.3 billion if states provides different assurances. So these unexplained and unprecedented moves really threaten to destabilize school budgets and directly affect students and teachers. We know that this funding freeze is going to disproportionately hurt students of color and low-income students and also newcomer students as well. For example, that $5.6 billion in education funding that was frozen included included 1.38 billion for student support and academic achievement for low-income students, and the funding that goes to that. And so the only explanation that the administration offered was that the funding was going on, quote unquote, under review to ensure that the programs align with the President Trump's priorities. So eventually that funding was released, but the fear is that more funding will be frozen if that funding does not align with the Trump administration's goals that they have outlined, even though Congress has already appropriated and approved that funding. We do know from the Trump administration that they propose some critical cuts to federal education spending for fiscal year 2026, including a 15% reduction in the Department of Education's total budget. And that would include more than a dozen grant programs that, again, pay for services like K through 12 English learners to support low-income students to reach college, adult education, teacher training, Pell Grant recipients. They propose trying to rescind some Pell Grant funding. And we also note that the House budget that they just released, I think just a week ago, aligned with President Trump's 15% reduction in the Department of Education budget, including almost slashing the Office of Civil Rights budget almost in half. And so really, really scary stuff as far as some of the cuts that the Trump administration is proposing and what Congress is also proposing in the appropriations process. So it's really, really, important that we fight in this moment to try to ensure that these cuts do not go forward. We are trying to make sure that our Senate colleagues, and we really hold the Senate, like the last speaker said, there's a 60 vote threshold on appropriations process. And so we're really trying to make sure that we hold our Senate components, our Senate counterparts, especially our Democratic Senate counterparts, their feet to the fire to ensure, again, that they make sure that these cuts do not go through. Because we do know, again, that House Republicans will push something like this through. And we know that the Trump administration wants these type of deep, deep cuts to educational funding, especially, again, going to our low-income students and our students of color. And another thing I wanted to highlight quickly is also just the housing component of this as well. One of the big programs that the Trump administration is trying to take steps to zero out funding completely is the Fair Housing Initiatives program. And that program provides grants to nonprofit organizations to combat housing discrimination through enforcement and education activities. And so they do fair housing testing. And so the Trump administration has pretty much said to do away with that program in all. And so we've seen that other fair housing testing programs have gone out of business. An example, in states like Arkansas and Oklahoma, there are only one or two of those FIT grant programs, and some of those fair housing programs have already gone out of business. And so there is nobody doing fair housing testing in those states. And also, as the last speaker said, in the total budget request, there is a historic 44% to HUD's vital affordable housing, homelessness, and community development programs, and would impose like some really critical changes to rental and homelessness assistance programs that would leave more families struggling to afford rent and at an increased risk of homelessness. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is for folks in our disabled community when it comes to housing. And so it's really important to note that President Trump's proposed budget would end the Section 811 program. So the Section 811 program for project rental assistance is a program that seeks to identify and support successful and innovative state approaches to providing integrative supported housing for people with disabilities. So the Section 811 program allows people with disabilities to live independently as possible in the community by subsidizing rental housing opportunities, which provides access to appropriate supportive services. This is a critical program that was funded in the billions of dollars by the Biden administration and previous administrations. And the Trump administration has just zeroed out that funding. And so we're really going to see, again, that's going to have a disproportionate impact on low-income disabled folks and also disabled folks of color. And so, unfortunately, we really have to, again, ensure that our Senate Democratic leaders really hold the line here so that these cuts do not go into effect. Because what the House Republicans and what the President Trump and what their administration is doing right now it is really, having is really decreasing the budget for housing justice causes, for housing services in general, and so it's something that's very, very troubling. Something that we really we need to make sure that we are holding our Senate counterparts their feet to the fire on this to make sure that these cuts don't go through. Back to you, Thomas.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Yeah, obviously a wide range of cuts that are being proposed. And this is just a reminder, I think, of what the Trump administration's real plan is, which is to make government less effective, make it harder for people to get the services that Congress and past administrations have put in place that working people have fought and won over the many decades. Um, they want to cut those programs. They want to make it less effective. And the ultimate goal is then to privatize those things, right? Whether it's healthcare, housing, education, they're thinking about, a corporate bottom line for their cronies. And just like we talked about, this is, part of a plan, like huge transfer of wealth from the bottom to the already very rich at the top. So this is what we're fighting back against, and we do have leverage in this fight, unlike in some other fights of the past 9 months or so. Michelle, if you want to do poll number 2, we've got another question for you all. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the process. So what is your familiarity with the funding process and specifically rescissions? Kind of a wonky word. It's the backdoor way to revoke funding that Congress has previously approved. So your familiarity with funding process and the concept of rescissions, never heard of it. I've heard of it, but I'm not super familiar. I'm pretty familiar with it, and I know what rescission is, or I'm a super budget expert. I know all of this frontwards and backwards. Let's give us another 30 seconds to answer that and just see where people are at. And then we're going to hear from my colleague, Mary, who will take us through some more important info. So let us know what your familiarity or knowledge level is about this process that we're talking about. Okay. Michelle, when you're ready. There we go. Okay. We've got one budget expert. We'd love to see it. And then a pretty wide range. So few people haven't heard of it at all. Some people have heard of it, but not super familiar. That looks like where most people are at. And that's great. That's why you're here, probably. You recognize that it's important, but wanted to learn more. So thank you for joining. Thank you for letting us know what your background knowledge is like. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Grant, who is the Public Water for All campaign director at Food and Water Watch. I think she is an encyclopedia of all water-related things, and a brilliant colleague at Food and Water Watch. She's going to talk more about the threats to public water infrastructure, and also the process that we just mentioned, and what our demands are for Senate Democrats. Go for it, Mary.
Okay, thanks, Thomas, and thank you to everyone again for joining us tonight. The Trump administration has also launched an attack on safe water. It's gutted drinking water protections, including limits on toxic PFAS, opened the door to more water pollution from big ag and the fossil fuel industry, illegally froze support for safe water at the beginning of the year, fired EPA staff that helped get water funding out the door, delaying the release of critical funds, begun to dismantle key parts of the EPA that are necessary to protect our environment and our water. And recently it proposed to outright eliminate the main source of federal funding for safe and clean water. On the next slide, you'll see that federal funding for safe water has been declining over the last nearly 50 years. Federal funding for safe water peaked in the late 1970s. We saw some bumps in support from Obama's stimulus and then more recently with Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law. But next year is the last year of funding from that law. And the Trump administration proposed to outright eliminate the drinking water and clean water state revolving fund programs, with an initial 89% cut this year to 100% in the future. Even if Congress were to fully fund these programs in the spending bill, the Trump administration could realize its agenda by withholding the funding and sending Congress a request to cut the funds that requires only a simple majority in the Senate. This is the rescission process, that sneaky backdoor way that they attacked funding for NPR and PBS. So Congress is also not even seeking to fully fund safe water right now. In fact, both chambers of Congress have proposed hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts. The House of Representatives has proposed a 24% cut to the funds, while the Senate's bipartisan proposal would eliminate $250 million in funding for lead service line replacements. That was already approved in the bipartisan infrastructure law, so it's clawing it back through this proposal. And this is, again, the last year of funding from that law, and communities need every dollar. So all the spending proposals on the table right now are bad for safe water. And so on the next slide, what does this mean for people? It'll mean unsafe, unaffordable water. Millions of people have drinking water contaminated by lead pipes and toxic chemicals like PFAS. Lead is a dangerous neurotoxin. It harms every major system of the human body, causing everything from learning disabilities to kidney failure to stillbirths. PFAS are known to cause cancer and are linked with a really big range of human health harms. So stripping away federal funding will lead to less safe water and more diseases at the same time that, as you heard earlier, healthcare cuts are being stripped away, or stripping away access to healthcare, closing hospitals, and making it too expensive to go to the doctor. Water bills will also get more expensive. The price of all the basics is continuing to grow beyond reach for many families. So these cuts will lead to water price hikes on households who are already struggling to afford their water bills. Nearly 1 in 5 households nationwide is already in water debt, and about 5% of households are shut off from water each year. Without water, you can't wash your hands, flush the toilet, cook food like pasta, and so much more. Again, added on to how this administration is making us all sicker and poorer. So next slide. So where do we go from here? Senate Democrats have their chance, maybe their only opportunity for the next year to take a stand. This upcoming spending bill requires Democratic support. It needs 60 votes to avoid the filibuster. But Trump's sneaky future cuts through the rescission process would only need a simple majority. So Republicans can do those backdoor cuts in the future alone. That means that right now, Senate Democrats must stand strong and reject these cuts that harm our communities, and they must guarantee this funding by taking away Trump's access to that sneaky backdoor process to cut the funds in the future, the fast-tracked rescission process of the Impoundment Control Act. He has already abused the system with his latest unconstitutional line item veto of foreign aid funding, and Democrats should expect him to try it again and again. Again, we've seen Republicans collude with Trump to greenlight attacks on public broadcasting, so Democrats cannot trust their Republican colleagues to keep their word on any spending bill. They must fight to ensure that whatever spending bill comes forward includes clear language that prohibits Trump's sneaky backdoor cuts through partisan rescissions. At this moment, the spending bill will likely be a continuing resolution, which extends current funding levels. How long will they kick the can down the road? Just today, Trump asked for a 4-month extension through the end of January 2026. Other members of Congress want a 1 or 2-month extension of funding. Trump also sent a list of suggested changes from current funding levels. These are called anomalies. He seeks to extend the earlier clawbacks or rescissions for another year. We will have to see if Republicans just follow Trump's orders again or if they negotiate a deal with Dems before September 30th. We will likely see this fight go to the wire. So will there be a shutdown of the federal government at the stroke of midnight on October 1st? If there is, this will be because congressional Republicans care more about indulging Trump's dictator dreams than the health and well-being of their constituents. Democrats should not surrender again and compromise on these essentials that our communities need. So I'm going to turn it back to Thomas now.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Okay. Oh, Michelle, can you? Bring me back. And we're going to take a few questions. We got some good ones in the chat. But first, I just want to emphasize one thing that Mary said, because we've talked about this a lot with, I've talked about it a lot with colleagues and with volunteers, and it's complicated and there's a lot on the line. The big picture takeaway is this: Congress has in the past funded a bunch of really important programs. Mary and David and Isaias all talked about really important programs that the federal government supports. Each year, the government generally continues funding those programs. Sometimes there's cuts, sometimes there's more, but that is generally the process. That takes 60 votes in the Senate to appropriate money to approve the next year's spending bill. That takes 60 votes in the Senate. What doesn't take 60 votes is to rescind that money. That's why we use the word rescission. That only takes 50 votes. So right now there's an uneven playing field between appropriating and then clawing that money back. What we want Dems to do is say, we're not going to go along with these unconstitutional and illegal things that the Trump administration is doing. We're not going to allow you to cut these things unless you put protections in place that say that it takes at least 60 votes to rescind those things. It's going to take bipartisan compromise to rescind those things. Again, a little bit complicated, but the basic facts are: takes 60 votes to do one, takes 50 to do another. Dems need to hold the line and say it should take 60 votes to do both, and that would really help stop Republicans from using that maneuver in the future. We have a few good questions. So Mary and David and Isaias, if you want to turn your video on, I'm going to direct some of these to you. Okay, so there's a question from Margaret that gets at a little bit of what I just said. But Mary, maybe you can get into a little more detail, and then David and Isaias, if you have anything to add. So Margaret says, if taxpayer monies have been allocated by Congress in one year's budget, why is it possible for a president to single-handedly reallocate the same money to projects of his personal choice? Shouldn't the money be returned to taxpayers? It's not going to where the people's representatives in Congress spend it. It's not open game for anyone to abscond with it. I agree. So Mary, maybe talk about what Trump has done on his own versus what they're trying to do in Congress.
Sure. So Trump is withholding funding. He's also, like you said, moving funding around from one pot to another, which he shouldn't be able to do. There are Congress, when they put out an appropriations bill, they often have report language that will document some of just basically describe how they think the funding should be spent. But if that is not detailed within the law of the appropriations bill, then Trump has more free range to move funds around. So that's one of the things the bipartisan Senate bills are seeking to do, is trying to add some of that report language into the actual text of the law to add more teeth to challenges when he does illegal actions. I think that there is an understanding that what Congress does can't force Trump to follow a law, but it can make the law clear about what Trump has to do to make the case stronger in courts. So I think that's also part of some of the questions that we're getting right now. So what is Congress doing right now? The bipartisan appropriations bill in the Senate has some of that language that will be more direct in how the funding has to be allocated. A continuing resolution is less clear about that. And so for the Democrats in Congress, it's part of their consideration for whether or not they want to fight. How hard they want to fight is because they're really worried that a CR will give too much room for Trump to make additional cuts. They really want to negotiate that bipartisan bill. So does that answer that question? Or maybe other panelists
I think so.
have
And
add-on?
actually, Anne just put a good summary, an anti-rescission clause added to the particular piece of legislation, and we're going to get to that in a second. That's actually something that all of our organizations and 200 plus others just sent a letter last week, it kind of in more detail, asking for explicitly that. There's a senator from Oregon, Jeff Merkley, who has proposed this. We're saying basically Senate Democrats need to all agree, we're only going to vote for this if you include this anti-rescission clause, and if these cuts aren't included. Um, David, there's a question about executive orders. Since from another David, since the Trump Vance executive branch governs by executive orders, how will this be constrained in the U.S. Senate by the Congressional Budget Allocation Bill? Do you want to talk about what some the members of Congress can do, especially in this process, to constrain some of the bad actions by the administration?
Yeah, so that's one of the good things, I guess, better things about the appropriation process is that some of Trump's executive orders are don't have the authority of an appropriations process or a bill or something that gets through by Congress. And so, if Congress appropriates something, even if the Trump administration has some type of executive order on that, the kind of the appropriations process still kind of trumps that executive order that the Trump administration may have. And so that's why, again, it's really key that throughout this appropriations process, that if there is, some type of CR, whatever is voted on, that it includes some type of anti-rescission language in there that ensures that the Trump administration cannot just claw back that funding and money that Congress has appropriated. And just a quick piggyback on, again, why that is such a big thing within the agency, kind of answer that last question a little bit, is that we've recently seen, how that can play out. In the Department of Homeland Security. Department of Homeland Security moved money that was meant for disaster relief to build Alligator Alcatraz. Right. So we've seen how this administration has been able to move funding, and that's why it's really, really critical throughout this appropriation process that our senators know that they have to include some type of anti-rescission language. But getting back to the other question, no, the executive orders that the Trump administration is putting through are simply, they are on the agency itself. But if Congress appropriates and approves funding for a certain thing, that funding should go for that resource and for that purpose.
Well, thanks, David. I want to highlight what the alligator Alcatraz story, which I hate that name, but people know what it means, so I'll use it for now. I think this is a really like upsetting but interesting example of how, in the context of all of Trump's assaults and all of the Republicans in Congress assaults, there are really key points of intersection. So just like you said, the administration took money that was supposed to be for disaster response, right, from a hurricane, storm, flood-prone state to build a detention facility, under racist and anti-immigrant policies that would make, the area even more flood prone, right? You're like paving over wetlands. And a lawsuit brought by an environmental group and a local tribe got that facility to be shut down on conservation grounds, right? Obviously, with the context of the terrible immigration and deportation policies, but like all of these things are really connected, and the spending, the money, the immigration policies, the environmental policy, all of these things are really connected, and it's a lot to keep track of. But again, it's an example of how they're connected and how we can fight back together, and kind of break down the silos within our progressive movement. Isaias, there's a question specifically about immigration related policy. So what can be done in each state to counteract federal actions by Trump administration that hurt our nation's immigrant populations, both documented and undocumented? Maybe we want to talk about the relationship between the federal policy, what's happening at the state level, maybe what some of the PD affiliates are working on.
Sure, that's a great question. It's a big one. But I think that there's a couple of examples of how communities have come together to really taint what the administration has done and is trying to do. So one of the examples, at least two cities where we've had the occupations from the National Guard and just like massive ICE presence, Los Angeles and DC. And so what we've seen here, I live in DC, and so what it's been very powerful to see is the trainings in which churches, community-based organizations, faith institutions have trained people to be active bystanders. And so what that means is whenever you see ICE in the street, take out your phone, do noise, basically alert all immigrant neighbors around to not leave their homes, and basically put a mirror into the face of ICE and, morally question what they're doing. And it hasn't worked all the time, but it has uh, alleviate some of our immigrant neighbors away from being taken from ICE. The fact that it's been recorded, the fact that it's been basically like we've been able to show how they've continued to violate civil liberties has been a very useful tool that maybe right now we're not able to use because the courts are taking over. But I believe that in the future we can prove that the way that our people are being taken away, and this is immigrants and like the way that Black youth have been persecuted is incredibly the same. So it's just like Black youth are out in the street and we're seeing National Guard come and harass them, being taken away, snatched, like put in whatever excuse. And so the way that bystanders have stood there to do it in many instances have been very powerful to just like counterpoint. A second one that has been very powerful, and this is where we need to push our members of Congress to be more bold, is going into detention centers or going into these like de facto, the New York, Manhattan Tower building where in the 12th floor, it's a USCIS office where people go in and check in for their asylum interview. And then ICE is waiting right there for them. And they're being snatched and then being like put in a small room, 50 people with one toilet. We've all seen those horrible images. So being present in those areas physically, having constant vigils, like so Make the Road New Jersey, for example, had a constant vigil in one of these detention centers. Yes, Federal Plaza, thank you. Make the Road New Jersey was able to have all these vigils, constant community presence, and members of Congress being there, to the point where the Newark mayor got arrested, and it became a national point of really like contention. And so if we're able to find those ground zero places, they can be detention centers, they can be rural hospitals. Like if we could get a vigil in a rural hospital that we know is going to close because of the cuts, that's the way that we can intersect the national narrative and really taint and just like shame the administration for what they're doing. And then, of course, pushing for local and state policies if you can, if you live in like bluer districts or bluer states, so that there's some protections for our immigrant neighbors. But yeah, I'll leave it there for some examples of how our affiliates are working.
That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think the local elected officials, local and state elected officials showing up and using their power in a little bit unconventional ways. But we saw like, various local elected officials, especially in New Jersey and New York recently, like were arrested over this. But that was like using their position and their privilege to do that is hugely important. And so the folks who aren't doing that, we got to push them to do that and do as much as we can ourselves. Okay, great. We had other questions specifically ahead of the call that were about what to do about this spending bill, pushing the Democrats to use their powers on this. We have a few things specifically related to this that folks can do just in the next week or so. Again, the month of September is really critical. Deadline for the spending bill is the end of the month. So the next couple of weeks are really critical. First one, we mentioned a letter that Popular Democracy and LDF and Food and Water Watch and about 200 other groups, several unions, the teachers union, nurses union, a bunch of progressive and environmental groups signed this letter. We emailed that to your senators. You can show up in person to a district office of your senator and say, hey, did you get this? All these organizations, I'm a constituent or we're a group of constituents and we want you to do this. We have a little template you can adapt, put your name on it, put your senator's name on it. My colleague Mark just put the link to sign up for that in the chat. So that's pretty easy to do. Show up in person, bring a couple people, and deliver this letter from our 200 plus organizations. Next thing, this Thursday and next Thursday, we are hosting phone banks where we will call Food and Water Watch supporters in key states and say, hey, here's the problem, threats to drinking water funding, threats to healthcare and housing and education. Your senator needs to stand up against this. Will you call them? Can we transfer you to their office so you can tell them to stand up and fight for us? So the phone banks are really easy, really effective. You can do it from home. We've got one this Thursday and next Thursday. And again, we'll be calling people, asking them to make a call and transferring them directly to their Democratic senator. For anybody in New York City or proximate to New York City, we're going to go directly to Senator Schumer's office on Monday. So we've got a sign up link for that. Again, with this letter, with our allies, a Popular Democracy affiliate, New York Communities for Change, is thrown down with that, along with some local indivisible groups, some other awesome New York-based groups. So again, if you are in New York City or you're near New York City and you want to join us Monday at noon in Manhattan at Chuck Schumer's office, we're going to be going there in person. Three quick things. David and Isaias shared a few other resources. We will share those around in an email tomorrow, along with the recording and these things that we mentioned. Just wanted to encourage people again, the links to take action are in the chat. So deliver a letter to your senator, join a phone bank to drive calls, connect with either a Food and Water Watch organizer or one of Popular Democracy's affiliates in many places around the country. And if you happen to be in New York City, join us on Monday. We're going directly to Chuck Schumer's office. It's just a few minutes before the top of the hour. Last thing I'll say again, if you want reminders about more calls like this, the phone banks, other events, the resistance reminders are super easy. Text the word resist to 23321. We send you one text a week with a few reminders to take action. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, David, and thank you, Isaias. It's incredibly important and valuable for us to come together from different organizations, different backgrounds, learn from each other, and take action together. So thank you all for your time. Thanks to you, everyone, for joining, and let's keep up the fight. Have a good rest of your night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.